Whenever new and faster computer hardware comes out, I always like to get it all together and build the fastest computer that you possibly can. And today, that's pretty much what I'm doing. I've got the Intel 12th Gen Core i9 12900K processor. I've got an RTX 3090 graphics card, and this whole video is being sponsored by Corsair. So I have a bunch of Corsair parts, including their newest DDR5 Corsair Dominator Platinum memory, as well as a pleasing assortment of additional Corsair hardware like the iCue 5000X RGB case, the RM1000X power supply with the sleeved cable kit, the new H150i Elite LCD all-in-one liquid CPU cooler with a 360mm radiator and the display right on the pump block itself, and some clutch hardware from MSI as well, so a big thank you to them for providing not only the 12900K CPU, but also the MPG Z690 Carbon Wi-Fi motherboard and the MSI Supreme X variant of the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3090, the fastest gaming graphics card that NVIDIA currently makes. What could be better than building this all today? Perhaps giving it away in a future video, but let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Excellent!
This is the part where I would usually go over all of the individual parts that we're building with today, but I feel like I've already given you guys a pretty decent rundown of that in the intro. So other than stuff like the motherboard, the graphics card, our gorgeous Dominator Platinum RGB DDR5 memory kit, the special edition version of that, the CPU of course with the 12900K, and the other things I mentioned like the RM1000X power supply, we got a few other things in here. There's the power supply sleeved cable kit for that power supply, so the cables will look very nice, and we've also got cable combs. Corsair does cable combs now, so good to have those so we can train them up nice and make them look pretty. We're gonna have a fair amount of RGB in this build. That comes naturally, of course, with Corsair's iCue stuff. So we've got the iCue Commander Core XT, which is the Big Daddy version, so that's gonna allow us to connect a lot of our RGB as well as fans, and then that connects over to the motherboard so you can control everything with the iCue software. This is new right here. This is the MP600 Pro XT, which is a new variant of the MP600. It's the 1TB model. It has up to 7100 megabytes per second reads and 5800 megabytes per second writes, as well as 900,000 IOPS random read and 1.2 million IOPS random write. And there's a beefy and also quite nice looking heatsink on top of that, a little M.2 SSD, so that's going to be our operating system drive as well as housing a bunch of games. I do have one confession to make, and that's for the H150i Elite LCD cooler up here. You maybe will notice that this box is empty, or pretty much empty, and that's because Corsair sent over two of these. One was for the build and one was part of the Alder Lake launch kit. And I went and set up dual test beds for my Alder Lake testing, which means I've got one of them over here and one of them right here. So I'm gonna need to decommission one of these units from a test bed and swap it over. Fortunately, I've treated them very nicely. They're still in great shape. It's still got all the original hardware attached. And that should give you guys a pretty good idea of the hardware we're working with today. A couple quick notes before I start building. One is that, like I said, this build is destined to be given away. That giveaway isn't started yet. That will kick off in a follow-up video where I will also test this system to give you guys a better idea of the performance, and that giveaway is going to help support a charity live stream event that I'm doing along with my good friend Kyle, aka Bitwit, and that is pretty much going to be an all-day event on Saturday, December 11th. So follow me on Twitter or stay tuned to my YouTube channel for more details on that. All of that said, let's get this build put together. Here is the iCue 5000X RGB case in its nice pristine condition. I still have not peeled any of the plastic off the sides. I'm gonna wait until the very end to do that, which is why things are, not as shiny as they could be. But this version of the case is all about RGB and aesthetics, which is why you have the glass panels on the front there, as well as across the top. You can get slightly more airflow in this case. They do have a airflow panel that can swap in instead of that. But like I said, when I do the follow-up here, I will give you guys a little bit of thermal testing, and I'm positive that when we pop all the fans into this that we want to put in and everything, we'll be able to get good temperatures. We got thumb screws on the back that I've already loosened, and then you can just pop the side panel off. It's recommended to use two hands rather than doing what I'm doing. Right here. Oh yeah, Joe's here. There we go. Pops right out. Like I said, protective plastic is still on there. And then we have our interior. This is a case that I've built in before, and it is very full featured. It's got all the space you need for whatever you want to install there. It comes with 3 RGB fans pre-installed at the front. I will be digging into my set of Corsair fans. I actually have probably too many Corsair RGB fans here, but we'll see what we want to install here, whether we want to swap those out or leave those as is. Chances are I just want to find stuff that matches all the way around, and we can also pop off the top panels like this. That's one thing I really like about this case is all the panels are held on by these little nubs, and those little nubs just sort of sit into recessed areas on the case. So they're held pretty securely as is, and then if you do need to pop them off or reinstall them, it's just a matter of lining that up and pressing down, and that's a good way of removing stuff. The rear panel here, or the other side panel, does have a mesh vent with some dust filtration built into it. So that's great because you might notice there is a vertical panel right here. That can be removed so you can install fans there instead. So you have a couple different options for variations of how you want the air inflow or exhaust. That provides a lot of flexibility, especially if you're doing like a custom water-cooled setup in this case. On the rear side here, they also have provided a protective, I don't know whether you want to call this a modesty panel, a protective panel. Basically, it's going to hide that cable management so that you can do it all up and then just close the door, and then it hides it, and so you don't have to worry about being quite as particular about it, since there is tempered glass right here that can provide a view through. I did a build in the white version of this case, and I just left this off because either I felt my cable management was adequate, or I was just like, I'd rather have access to that, but it's your option. Like I said, this just slides off this little hinge right here without too much difficulty. And if I may quickly correct myself from my original build in this case, I wanted to use a Corsair AX1600i power supply, which is a very long power supply because it's 1600 watts of power. And I determined that I couldn't because it was too long, it was conflicting with the drive cages. I still wanted to have the drive cages there. I didn't want to shift the drive cages over to where they'd be blocked by this panel. But I do want to point out that despite what I said at that point in time, this panel is removable. It's just these Velcro straps are in front of the 3 screws that you need to unscrew in order to remove that. But that is something that you can do. And like I said, just correcting myself from the last time I built in this case. Also, it should be fairly obvious, but this is the black version of this case. It is available in white as well. And since this is the iCue RGB version of this case, it does come pre-installed with an RGB unit right here, as well as a fan header unit right here. So you can wire those all up and control them with the iCue software. And we've almost immediately encountered our first dilemma this build, just a decision that needs to be made, and it has to do with the SSD installation. I've actually been encountering this with more and more builds that have higher end SSDs that come with heat sinks pre-installed. It's a nice big fat one, and it's got, you know, decent surface area there thanks to the fins. And you have to assume on some level that Corsair made this SSD and this heat sink, so they probably did it with some idea in mind of how much heat output this would have, and so this is a suitable heatsink. However, all of our M.2 slots on this motherboard have heat sinks pre-installed over them, and they're all nice and flat on top, and they all have this sort of design aesthetic that blends them together. So if I wanted to pop one of these off and install our Corsair SSD, I could totally do that, and I could leave the heatsink on, but then you'd expose stuff like this heat pad over here with the MSI logo. The MSI logo is actually on the plastic that you peel off, but it still would be gray, and it's still sort of more of an unfinished looking thing than when you actually have this heatsink on. Likewise, there's a big long one down here at the bottom that can also pop off. This one doesn't have thermal pads on both sides, it only has it on the top. So I could install it in one of those, like there, or over here. But again, that just leaves us with sort of a big kind of unfinished looking area of the motherboard compared to what it was like before. So I think what I'm gonna do, and this is probably more of an aesthetic choice than a practical choice for performance, and we'll have to see how things turn out, but I am gonna remove the heatsink from this SSD so we can just install it under one of the heat sinks that came with the motherboard. They're also very durable. Solid state, that means you can drop it, you don't have to worry. So different AIOs work in different ways or mount in different ways and connect up in different ways. And this new one from Corsair, the H150i Elite LCD, has an entire top piece that just pops off. It's got a little interface there that it actually plugs into with a little plug on the bottom. So you'd have to kind of line that up properly. And there's one cutout side here that you can line up with the tube so you know which way it goes. And then you just sort of pop it back down to reinstall. That's actually been very convenient as I've been removing and reinstalling this to do testing, because all of the wiring is connected up to that. So I can remove that, and then it gives me access to just the pump block unit itself, which I can wiggle off like so. And if you're unfamiliar with LGA 1700, the socket and builds with it, it's really not too different from LGA 1151 or LGA 1200. The mounting pattern for the 4 holes on the motherboard is different, and you need different standoffs because the Z height of the CPU itself is a little bit different. But beyond that, it's pretty straightforward, like I said. Now, each of the fans from this unit has 2 leads coming off of it. One is just your standard 4-pin PWM fan connector. So that allowed me to connect them all directly to the motherboard, so I could use motherboard control to a little bit more quickly set them all to the 90% fan speed that I was running them at. However, they do also have RGB leads coming off of them. So if you're setting up a full system like I'm doing today, you can plug both the fan headers and the RGB into the Commander Core XT, or the built-in unit that comes with the 5000X case if that's what you want to do. And then this unit, which is the LCD, the RGB lighting, as well as the control for the pump, that feeds over here and needs to plug into one of these Corsair control units. And for my purposes, again, for testing, I was able to just connect this up to SATA power in order to have the pump running, and then the LCD defaults to showing you the liquid temperature if you don't have this connected up to the motherboard and the software to show other things that you can show on there. So I just had to spend a few minutes figuring stuff out because we have a lot of RGB going on in this case, and because Corsair's a sponsor, obviously I'm not allowed to say anything negative about the RGB. That's not true. It's a little bit complex to set up. However, if you're able to go through those steps, then you can get a much more full-featured RGB implementation than with a lot of other configurations. That said, our issue that we're looking at right now is USB 2.0 headers on the motherboard. Still very important this day and age, and there are solutions for that. There are USB 2.0 splitters, but here's basically what we have. We have this unit, which is a central unit for the pump and the water block and the LCD screen on our all-in-one liquid cooler. Coming off of that, we have several cables. One is a little USB 2.0 header that needs to plug directly into the motherboard, and that is for the LCD on that unit. There's also a proprietary cable that goes over here and plugs into a Corsair Commander unit. That also has power coming off of it, so that just needs some SATA power, and another USB 2.0 header. So this unit itself, just for the all-in-one liquid cooler, needs 2 USB 2.0 headers from the motherboard. This motherboard has exactly 2 USB 2.0 headers, one there and one right there. So this would use up all of them. However, our little Commander unit on here has 6 connection points for fans and 6 connection points for RGB LEDs. We're gonna have at least 7 fans in the case, 3 in the front, 3 at the top, 1 in the back, and it would be nice to also do the RGB header for the motherboard. Fortunately, we have a Corsair specific header on this motherboard, so that will greatly ease in integrating everything together and connecting that all up so it's all recognized properly by the iCue software. But then we also have these units, and these are what came with the case. This right here is essentially just a PWM fan splitter. It's got one cable that'll feed over to the motherboard so you can plug it in for controlling all these fans, and then power to control up to 6 fans at once. No problem there, but we're probably going to bypass this so we can control everything with Corsair's iCue software. This unit right here is for RGB LEDs, and this has another SATA power coming off of it and another USB 2.0 header. So that would give us 3 along with the 2 for the AIO, and that means we're not going to use this. We're actually going to remove that and instead use the iCue Commander Core XT, and there is one key reason for that. Like, we could just use that on the board if we had 3 USB 2.0 headers on the board, or we used some other kind of splitter, but this one actually has a pass-through. So that allows us to plug one end into the motherboard to control up to 6 of the RGB LED functions there. The other can go to a pass-through over to the AIO, and then the second one from the AIO can plug directly into the motherboard, and that should allow us to plug in all of our fans and all of the RGB and move on with our lives. I just explained all that RGB stuff, but before I go and install it and move on with the AIO, I want to plug as much stuff into the motherboard as possible while I still have easy access to it. So that means these extension cables from the power supply. These are very nicely sleeved and they come with some cable combs already, and then you can buy additional ones. And I wanted to show you guys how they work because I've never seen cable combs that work like this before. Maybe this is common, I just never seen it, I'm not sure. But basically each one has 3 pieces, one for each side and one in the middle. It's got 2 metal posts that stick out like that. The posts have some textured area up towards the top, so they will grip when they are compressed together, and basically it's just a matter of laying the bottom one in, inserting the middle one in between all of these cables, and pushing those posts through for our first step. And then the top one is going to go on top, and then of course I need to actually get all these cables into their appropriate grooves. All right, so they're all lined up properly now. This is still a little loose though, and I've tried to compress this by hand, but I found the easiest way is just grab yourself some pliers, squish it down. That compresses and holds it in place, and now we have 2 cable combs. And while these are a little bit more on the bulky side, they're sort of large and squared off. They do slide very easily across cables to sleeve them out and hold them in place. So I'm going to pop a couple more of these on there so that we can properly train the side that's going to stick out and be visible, that's plugging into the motherboard, and then we can plug this in too. All right, to ease cable management, I've removed this panel here, and it's not too difficult to remove. There's 2 screws at the top and the bottom that you can access directly from the back, and then there's 2 captive thumb screws that are kind of tucked in there that you might not spot immediately, so keep that in mind if you need to remove this panel. And now we can plug in our 24 pin, like so, and feed this back through here. It's day 2. We had a short day yesterday, so this is about as far as we got, and I've realized pretty quick today that the first thing I'm going to need to do is pull that top radiator for a couple different reasons. One is that the sleeved cables are really just smushed up there, and it's functional enough, but I really had to compress them, and I feel like if I pull that off, I can route them around the corner sort of through there, and that'll be a better solution. But I was also going to reinstall this panel because I was trying to figure out the situation with the 24-pin cable here, and I realized that I really can't get it back in there with the hardware that's installed right now. But I think that might be beside the point, because one of the benefits of it being day 2 is that this has arrived right over here. Corsair, being the glorious benefactors of this sponsored video, have sent not 1, but 2 H150i Elite LCDs. And while I think the one that I have installed here is just fine, what I can actually do is harvest the 6 fans from these 2 360mm AIOs. These are actually quite nice fans, and they look good from either side. They have kind of a reflective RGB-ish sticker on them that looks pretty cool. But these are ML Elite fans. They're maglev fans, so they're great. And while these ones that ship with the case are totally fine, I just feel like it would make everything a bit more pristine if we had the exact same fan used throughout the case, because the other thing is that I think rather than replacing that panel right there, because it would require some serious torquing and twistage of the sleeved cables, I think I'm just going to populate it with fans, and if these are right next to these, it'll just be slightly more evident that they're 2 different models. Anyway though, that's what I'm going to get started with here for day 2, so let's get going. All right, here's a quick update. I got all those fans installed up in front, and I've been doing a decent amount of cable management. I didn't show you all of it, but I've been tucking some stuff in and up there, doing some things like taking this middle front fan and passing the cable right between the two of these and squeezing it in between there so you can't see them. Definitely going with the stay positive theme in terms of airflow for this case, because we got 6 intakes right there at the front. Also, my sleeve cables are already looking really, really nice. They're training up. There's a 24 pin, and I'm much more comfortable with this passing straight back through this grommet rather than having to go in sort of at a side angle with the panel that was overlapping there before. And then for this top one up here, I used one of these 16 wire combs right here rather than the individual 8 ones, just for the first one coming off of there. That way I think I can sort of train this around, and that should have hopefully enough clearance to get past the corner of the 360 AIO. Things in back here still looking pretty messy, and I do need to install the power supply, but what I have been doing is taking the little sticker that says to RGB hub and putting numbers. So I've been numbering all of the fans. I want to plug those into the hubs in the proper order. I have 2 hubs with 6 inputs each, and I have 10 fans plus the motherboard. So that should give me enough wiggle room that I won't run out of inputs, and I decided to start at the top here and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Across the top will be 7, 8, 9. Once I get the rad reinstalled, 10 in the back. And that way if we do any like chase effects or anything like that, it will hopefully look really cool. And at long last, the build is complete. I have a few things to talk about real quick, but give me one sec. Okay, that's a bit better. Now let's talk about the good and the bad as far as this build coming together. And the good is that the build is together and the hardware is fully functional. Windows 11 is installed, CPU and GPU are working just fine. And that's especially making me happy because I didn't do an outside of the box build to test stuff beforehand. However, if there has been one greatest challenge with this build, it has definitely been the RGB setup, and you probably saw a bit of that with all of the cable management struggles that I went through in order to get everything wired up properly. And as I was wiring all that stuff up, the thought that occurred to me was like, am I gonna have to take all this stuff out at some point? And the answer has definitely been yes, because I've been working with these 2 USB 2.0 headers on the board, the Commander Core XT, as well as a control unit for the H150i Elite LCD, and I can't seem to get them both to recognize at the same time. Right now I've swapped back to the 6-fan LED controller that shipped with the case, so that's what's lighting all the fans up right now. Although the fans themselves are still wired to the Commander Core XT, which is what I unplugged just now to make them turn off because they're running at full speed, which is a little bit loud, although it does mean there is plenty of airflow in this case with all of that intake. I did discover that the H150i Elite LCD ships with a little USB 2.0 header splitter, which is very convenient since that unit itself has 2 plugs that need to plug in, and not all motherboards have a wealth of USB 2.0 headers these days. But those 2 headers on the motherboard are also routed through a hub, the Hub GL850G, which is a generic hub, but I think that might be causing some of the issues with getting all the devices to show up in the iCue software right off the bat. Also, the Corsair header on the motherboard is actually there to allow you to use the MSI software to control Corsair RGB functions. Like if you had just that little 6-port hub, you could route it into that and then sync everything up with the Mystic Light software. But all this is to say that while I have a fully functional, high-end, very nice gaming PC setup here right now, all of the complications are coming from the RGB setup. So my follow-up video, which is going to be testing this computer out some, is going to go into a little bit more depth on that RGB setup, what I tried, what worked, what didn't work. And of course, I'd be really interested to hear from you guys as to what testing you'd like to see me perform, whether it's more stuff with the RGB setup or functional testing of the components themselves, 12900K and the RTX 3090. Also in that follow-up video, I will be kicking off the giveaway for this system, so stay tuned for that. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're not already. And a huge thank you to Corsair for sponsoring this video and this build, as well as MSI for providing a bunch of components as well. I'll post links to those down in the video description if you're interested in setting up a system that's maybe something like this. Or maybe you might just win it, so stay tuned for that. And also a reminder that Kyle and I will be doing our charity live stream on Saturday, December 11th. So join us for that too if you're available on that day. Closing reminder to check out my store at paulshardware.net, where you can help support my channel by buying yourself some super sweet merch. And if you enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button on your way out, and stay tuned for the follow-up if you're interested in winning this system. Thanks again for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.